The Russian invasion of Ukraine has triggered a mass exodus of civilians scrambling to escape what is the first major armed conflict in Europe since the Second World War. The United Nations reported that more than 1.5 million refugees have crossed from Ukraine into neighbouring countries in just the past 11 days amid bitter urban fighting and Russian bombing campaigns against major cities. Now let's get an update. We're now joined via Zoom by Toby, Chief of Communications and Partnerships at UNICEF South Africa. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Toby.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now, Toby, you recently came back from Ukraine. Talk to us about, what some of the urgent needs of people on the ground, are. 1.5 million people from Ukraine have already, been rescued or have managed to flee that country. Just in the past couple of hours, we've been seeing, people coming under direct attack from, what we are hearing are Russian soldiers attacking people who are trying to flee. Just talk to us about what the needs are, what your experience was while you were there.
Yeah, well, clearly the situation is tragic and it's desperate for particularly for children and women who are affected. I was actually in Romania on the border with Ukraine, in two border posts in Romania, and what we saw were massive amounts of children and women coming across those borders, fleeing the horrors of what's going on inside Ukraine. On those particular border points, UNICEF has been setting up what are called these blue dot spaces, which are like hubs that provide people arriving with information, with guidance, and provides family reunification services when needed, and also some sort of basic psychosocial support and space for children to play and rest a little bit before they go on their uncertain journey ahead again. So we're particularly concerned for children inside Ukraine, but also those, of course, on the move. And the situation is unfortunately getting worse by the hour.
I would imagine, that, as you say, the impact, especially on children, is very traumatic. Talk to us about what you've seen in as far as that, particularly those Ukrainians that are still trapped in that country, that are not able, to leave that country. Like I said, the visuals that we've been seeing just over the last couple of hours, very, very dire situations there. What are the long-term effects, for children that are in war-torn countries? I mean, Ukraine just being one of those countries.
Yeah, I mean, the effects of conflict are horrific. I mean, there's the immediate effects of trying to stay alive. And that's why UNICEF is calling for the protection now, to provide also these sort of safe passages for children and women and civilians more broadly to get out of, in particular, the particularly dangerous areas. And that is absolutely critical. But what we really need is a ceasefire, because conflict has a devastating impact on the immediate well-being of children, but also on the long-term well-being. Psychologically, recovering from living through such horrors takes time, and it takes a lot of input, both from mothers, even from parents. I met mothers at the border who fled Ukraine because of their children. They all said, nearly every woman I met said that they were leaving because of their child. They were fearful for the future of the child, for their safety, and they needed to get them out to provide a future for them. Despite all the stress that they were going through, children were first and foremost in their mind, and bringing them to safety and finding something ahead for them, finding school, finding some form of childhood again is absolutely critical. And that's why we need peace essentially now.
Just talking about that ceasefire, we know that Russia announced yet another ceasefire, and a handful of humanitarian corridors would be open to enable civilians to flee, Ukraine. But previous such measures have fallen apart. We also know that there are likely more talks that will take place between delegations from these two countries. But just in as far as your work is concerned, talk to us about how difficult it is in this situation for aid workers, to be providing assistance, particularly when those corridors are not forthcoming, where you would need to safely, bring people to rescue.
It's extremely difficult operating inside Ukraine, of course, to deliver humanitarian assistance to where it's needed most. However, we can do things. So a couple of days ago, UNICEF brought in a convoy of 62 tons of supplies, and that included surgical equipment, first aid kits, even early childhood development kits to provide some normality for children sort of when they're on the move. So humanitarian assistance can get in. It's a massive challenge, and that's why we need these sort of protection spaces to protect the humanitarian space where UNICEF, but also other UN actors, also local organizations can then provide relief to children and women and others who are directly affected by the conflict inside Ukraine.
Toby, just talk to us about, any South Africans that that are still trapped in Ukraine, particularly because we know that just over 70 South Africans have managed, to flee Ukraine and going into parts of, other countries in Europe. Some have managed to make it back home safely, but we also understand that there are some that are still trapped, particularly students and female students at that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of South Africans trapped specifically. I was, like I said, at the border with Romania and Ukraine, and I did meet people there from Cameroon, from other countries who had fled as well. And the borders are open. The authorities in Romania were providing extraordinarily effective relief to people arriving. There was a very welcoming situation for people coming in who had just escaped the country. In one border post, there was actually a ferry where children and women were coming across the Danube to reach safety in Romania. And the authorities were saying that ferry usually takes 200 people, but what we saw were between 400 to 800 people clambering on board the ferry to get out of Ukraine and to come to safety in Romania. And that included a variety of people, but primarily children and women, as I already said.
Now, we know that your organization, provides tremendous aid to various countries that are in war-torn situations. Just going off the back of Ukraine lodging a complaint to the against Russia at the International Court of Justice in the Hague. To what extent, as UNICEF, do you add your voice in terms of, the suffering that you are seeing on the ground? I mean, it is a humanitarian crisis that we are currently seeing, that we are currently being dealt with. One analyst, in fact, saying that this is not a war against the army, it's a war against human beings because direct hits are now at residences and at buildings where people are residing, including hospitals where children are being treated for cancer, as an example.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the conflict is getting closer and closer to people's homes, to children's homes, to schools, to medical facilities. And that's why we keep calling for the protection of all those facilities and for the protection of civilians and children in particular. And that is as UNICEF, that is obviously one of our primary concern, that children are protected and that they can escape areas where the conflict is escalating and receive immediate assistance, humanitarian supplies, but also spaces to be safe, spaces to play, some light relief. Because there's a huge burden on the mothers, on women out there who are trying to help their children to get to safety. And we have to do what we can to support them as best we can. We know that several countries, of course, are assisting Ukraine. You've mentioned, of course, that you were stationed in Romania. We know that Hungary is involved, Moldova, Slovakia, etc. Talk to us about where your organizations are now currently focused and where they are currently stationed. We know that, of course, Poland taking most of that, of those 1.5 refugees that have fled Ukraine. But yeah, UNICEF, we've had a massive presence in Ukraine for many years, and particularly as the conflict escalated, unfortunately, in the east of the country more than 8 years ago. I personally provided support to the office there on a number of occasions. But we're now scaling up our presence at the borders, which is why I was in Romania as well to help our teams there. And we have operations in Romania at different border posts. We're scaling those up in Poland, like you mentioned, these blue dot spaces that provide this sort of safe hub and critically provide information and guidance for people to help them on their uncertain future, to provide some spaces for them to just sort of take a break for a little period before they have to move again. And UNICEF and many other partners, so local authorities, for example, in Romania, but also local organizations, are doing an extraordinary job at coming out with water, with food, with blankets. It's extremely cold across the region right now, and providing whatever support they can for children affected. And we hope that will continue and that borders will stay open so that children are kept as safe as possible.
Toby, there's a lot of talk that this 1.5 million refugees that we are currently seeing now could be increasing in a matter of days. What are your thoughts around what we are seeing, particularly given that we know that there is going to be a third round of talks between the delegates, and this could again prove futile, where we might not see a ceasefire anytime soon?
Well, I think as conflict escalates, the number of people on the move escalates and increases. And that is children and women in particular who start to move because you have no choice. Like I said, the women I met, they didn't want to leave their hometowns of Odessa and other areas where they came from. That was a last resort. But they realized that they had to get out because the conflict was seeping closer towards their homes and it was time to move. And so it's very much a last resort. But as the conflict escalates, then we will naturally see more and more people trying to flee for their own safety and for their futures, but in particular for the futures of their children. And that's what people are thinking about now. That's what everyone I met was thinking about. And that's why we have to do everything we can to support them, to provide services as best we can, and also to provide that sort of support for the longer term, the psychosocial, the psychological support that you were talking about, and help to get back into learning, early childhood development, back to school, some form of childhood back after the horrors that they've been through.
Of course, South Africa is sitting in a very, precarious situation where many are supporting Ukrainians, others are conflicted and, standing with what the South African government is saying, calling out for peace talks, etc. But should there be South Africans out there who really do want to assist? I mean, we know that there are organizations like yourselves, but other individuals. What would be the best way for them to assist, particularly, as you say, in the form of helping those women and children?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone obviously wants to support and protect children and women. UNICEF is scaling up its operation massively. We have an ask of actually $276 million for our work inside Ukraine, and then a further 73 million for the work to support people who have fled Ukraine in the neighbouring countries. And of course, we would ask people to support UNICEF to help us reach the children who are the most vulnerable, who need that support urgently now. And we would definitely call on people to help as best they can. There are also, obviously, of course, excellent local organisations working across those regions that I saw, in Romania, fantastic support from communities, from families, everyone coming together, showing solidarity to help people who have been through, really the horrors of conflict, who have left businesses behind, who have left homes behind, and in many cases who have left partners behind as well, and husbands and fathers.
And of course, this is all happening in the middle of a pandemic. Toby Fricker, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Toby is Chief of Communication and Partnerships at UNICEF South Africa. We'll continue with more.